Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Namaskar, dear friends. So we start today with a very interesting and very, I would say, energizing topic. That's the left. And not only left, but new left or neo-left, as we call many times. Many in our country have been celebrating the demise of communism and also their overground presence in the political sphere. But they are not aware that communism as an underground movement in the true sense, if I say underground only Naxals, but also not very talked about areas of intellectual sphere, mind space, and also in terms of their presence in the academics. So with all this, they are there. How did it happen? So the communism, which was prevalent all around when there were communist countries and there were communist dictatorship already around, at that time, somewhere in 1925-26, Gramci, a great theorist and ideological person, he realized that Italian Communist Party was not really doing well, and he went into reorganizing the Communist Party, went out and met Lenin, etc. And finally, a new Italian Communist Party was created. But by that time, Mussolini came and finally was arrested, put in prison, and he died a very poor death due to very cruel treatment to him. But in jail, he wrote 30 books about various aspects of New Left. That is the beginning of the New Left movement. Somewhere around 1964, in Birmingham University, a new department for cultural studies was started. It did some great work till 2002 when it was closed down. By that time, this particular movement of cultural studies, yes, Gramsci talked about hegemony. So all the word you keep on hearing about hegemony was a terminology created by Gramsci. So from this cultural studies department, a lot of things came up. Then USA fell in line. USA academics also went into cultural studies. And as of today, when I last counted, there are 44 subtopics within cultural studies. And in JNU followed suit. As we know, we copy very fast. By 1969, JNU itself had a department of cultural studies within literature. And in the same structure, the main speaker today, Professor Prasanna Deshpande, he also is a teacher of postgraduate in English in Ferguson College, Pune. And he takes cultural studies for the postgraduate students. And he has done his PhD. As I said, he is teaching English and cultural studies in Ferguson College, and a very, very prominent authority on New Left and all the aspects of New Left. I can say that this is the person who I found the most authoritative and deeply read about New Left movements. With me is also Abbas Mahaldiyar, a Marxist turned a Sanghi, who never went to Shakha to add to that. He's an architect, very renowned architect. And apart from being an architect, he's a deep researcher. Everybody on Twitter knows him. He also writes articles now on my prompting, if I may say so. And but he writes wonderfully, very deep research. In fact, he provided me some of the research links I wanted. And with this, today I called him because he's a veteran Marxist who turned rebel. And he can begin with his own experience with Marxism, what basically Marxism tells. Because many of us don't know what is Marxism, what is communism, though we don't have much time. We are covering a period of 1925 to right up to 2020, I would say. It's a huge time frame, about 90 years. But we will try to cover some steps, major defining steps from those. So with this, first I will ask Aabhas to make his opening remarks about what he understood of Marxism and how over a period of time he found it to be disconsolate with his own idea of Bharatiya culture and Bharatiya civilization. Because that, I think, was his turning point, if I've read his book right. So over to Aabhas. You can unmute yourself, Aabhas.
Yeah. Thank you, Ratanji. It's indeed a pleasure to be over here and to be discussing upon such an important subject. And I'm glad that you have looked to keep it very academic in nature, and an eminent person like Professor Prasanna is here he will indeed give us a great insights. But as far as my experience with the subject is concerned, I do see myself as a self-declared Marxist, or a person who really was highly influenced with the Marxist ideas. Someone who once believed
Abbas,
that.
in fact, I read about not just hegemony, but also structuralism. So was the structuralism something that you talked about in our architecture?
Yeah, and it becomes, one thing is very crucial in whole architecture education, that it's highly influenced by the art movements. And when we talk about the art movement, somehow the deconstructivism, or they say the postmodernism, plays a very crucial role in every architect's life today. Best of the buildings, what you see, are said to be highly influenced by the deconstructive ideas. Like when I talk about deconstructivism, just to give a fair amount of idea that how famous it is. Everyone has, many of us have seen Walt Disney building, that how it appears like. So it was designed by Frank Gehry, and it is based on a deconstructive principle. So it gives you an idea that how famous this idea has become in architecture, and everyone wants to replicate it. And once this goes on and on, and if a person is fond of reading, if a person is fond of exploring more into the theories, then he will easily get influenced by those theories, because a lot of writings were happening. Like Derrida wrote about, Derrida is said to be the father of deconstructivism. So most of the architects would feel that perhaps Derrida was architect or someone like, but he was a philosopher. He wrote all about the postmodernism and how the ideas of deconstructivism was laid. And in terms of architecture, exactly deconstructivism means that if you have given a rectangular site, so a deconstructive idea will be to build something at a very distinct angle. A normal idea will be that you will leave the building set back and you will just get a rectangular building onto the side. But a deconstructive guy will say that, I just want to tilt the building. My building will be tilted, irrespective of what the climatic, just to, just go against the idea that this is an existing idea. I just want to do it. So this is how fairly a deconstructivism can be understood in terms of architecture. It had a lot of influence on me, and I did start reading. I started by reading the works of Asymptote, and I read the work of Derrida to a great extent, and all his papers influenced me a lot. And I did fell into read the works and look into the works of Daniel Levensky, again a very famous architect, and I love his works actually. And his one of the most famous work is the Jewish Museum in the Berlin. It's a remarkable work, but it's work of deconstructivism again. But somehow these deconstructive ideas in the Western context was working very well in the buildings, but they will just not go well when it comes to the Indian context because of multiple reasons, and it just can't translate our ideas so strongly. But whatever it may be, coming back to how my influences were happening, and when I started reading them, and there were a lot of references about the work of Engels and the Marx, and ideas of the Lenin, and that is when I started falling into the trap that, or what one can say, that my downfall or whatever. I do see that that was a very important phase of my life. Had it not been there, then I won't have been so critical of any ideas. Right now,
Abbas, as you know, it is very famously said that if you are not a communist till the age of 25, you don't have a heart. And if you stay a communist beyond 40 years, you don't have a mind. So you change your mind in the right time. So there is nothing falling. You go into the right place, because it gives you lots of strength in analysis. I believe that if you read Marxist literature, etc., it gives you a very wonderful way of analyzing things and reading between the lines, etc., etc. So because of that, did you then finally come out of it and landed up with the Indian civilization and our own architectures? What was it that persuaded you to move the other way?
Actually, it was, I am very grateful to Marxism, because for one thing, that it actually let me question a lot. Marxism actually is based on the foundation that you have to put across the question, and it's based on the rationality. Though the Marx himself were not very rational. If you go across his letters exchange with the people, the way the Marxists have criticized the science, the way Marxists have criticized the quantum physics, and how anti-Einstein they were. Of course, I have reservations against Einstein. That's a different thing, but they were largely against the quantum physics and modern physics. So, but the foundation itself was to question the existing ideas or whatever the ideas are there. So, by our childhood, by the virtue we get, by the dharmic virtue that whatever elders have said, that becomes like a concrete thing, and you're not supposed to question. That is how we have had been growing. But as a Marxist kid or someone who is deeply influenced in rationality, always had the question that why something is happening the way it is. Like why you are supposed to enter the puja room by leaving your the sleepers outside, or why someone is putting kumkum, or there are multiple things. You just start getting into the questions, and when those questions keep coming to you, and if you at all get the answers, then you will find that what exactly the idea of rationalism was, or what the idea of logicness was, it exists the maximum in the Indic idea. So I do see that no one can be more liberal than the Hindus or the Sanatanis or the people who live beyond the Indus River, who are the Hindus.
That is when your journey began to return back to dharmic roots, I can say that.
Yeah, and it was in Ajanta Cave. I have told this story to quite a lot of time, but it was just an inquisitiveness to understand that how the people painted, did the paintings inside the Ajanta Cave, because it was a dark space and you don't have light, and then how do you do it? So the monks, whom I deem to be like a superstitious guy, as a Marxist, as what you can say, a communist or whatever, I deem to be the superstitious people. But I was told that those monks used to store water in the ditches inside the cave and have the light reflected. The sun rays used to fall in, and that is how they generated light. So the so-called snail's law was being used by these monks 2,000 years back. And this was so startling for a young Marxist. And I had got my answer that how this was done. And I do found that, whoever is opposing it are the most dogmatic people, are some other people who have no substance. They just talk of rationality, but are the most irrational people, sort of people on earth. And that perhaps started becoming my journey back to the roots. And so that it was.
So now we'll move to Prasanna ji. Prasanna ji heard the introduction to Marxism. Of course, you have seen many people, going the same route, many returning, some not returning. But I think in India, most of the people do turn back. So how did disillusionment with Marxism happen at the global level? At the personal level is what Aabhas just talked about. At a global level, how did Gramci realize there was something wrong in the kind of communism that was being spread? So he came up with new ideas, and how it evolved.
Yeah, first of all, Ratanji, namaste. Aabhasji, namaste. Namaste and good evening to all the viewers. And thanks for inviting. It's really an enlightening talk. I hope that it will be an enriching session too. Since you said in my introduction that he is a literature professor, so I need to be loyal to my profession first of all. So I'll start with one very famous line of Thomas Gray, who was an 18th century poet. In his famous poem, Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard, by the way, this has nothing to do with your comment on many celebrating the demise of communism in India. So Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard has one line, and I'm quoting Thomas Gray: "New order, the old order changes, yielding place to new." Right. So the word neo-left is the key word as far as the left is concerned with regards to the present discussion, the talk that we are having. Aabhas has made it very clear. You also, in your opening remarks, made it very clear as to, how Marxism as a way of thinking, it kind of captures the thought process, not just of the young people. I'm quite sure while you introduced Aabhas as somebody who was a diehard Marxist, but now turned a nationalist or rightist or whatever, I'm sure that there could be some reverse situation in case of a person that he turned a Marxist at a later age. So that's also possible. And as both of you said, it's more about the questioning spirit that the writings of Marx that it inspires. Having said that, to come to your question, as to how did such a such a feasible and advanced thought, it was definitely perceived as a very modern thought in the backdrop of the Industrial Revolution. So how did it happen that such an all-encompassing philosophy, which virtually touches upon all the aspects of human life, and it takes care of materialistic outlook, and it takes care of capitalism, and it talks about the bourgeois, it talks about egalitarian society, it talks about the brave new world, and so on. So in spite of all the good promises that Marxism made to the world, why and how did it happen that in Europe to start with, because globally Marxism was not a very relevant something, especially when we look at ourselves in the backdrop of what was happening in Europe at the wake of the Industrial Revolution and so on. So globally, it wasn't really a very relevant thing. But yes, for Europe, it was very much something very, very relevant, because Europe was totally busy with the industrial fervor. It was busy with, it was to get busy with colonization and whatnot. And in the backdrop of all these socio-political, cultural transformations that were taking place in Europe, it was quite certain that, you know, the monolithic standards of the European society, the monolinguistic nature of the European society, the monotheist culture of the European society. So in the backdrop of all this, and also xenophobia has always been an issue in most of the European countries. So in the backdrop of all this, Marxism was perceived as a very handy intellectual exercise to as some kind of intellectual tool to solve and address some of the problems that were prevalent at that point of time. In spite of so many promises that Marxism made to the world, at the turn of the century, we find that there was a gross disillusionment, and people started questioning Marxism itself and so on. So one of the major reasons which I have understood through my readings is that Gramsci has actually, you know, he has not abandoned communism or socialism or Marxism. He has, if we could say this, he has modified Marxism.
Yeah.
So the base and superstructure theory.
But what I meant is he was much ahead of time, because at that time communism was doing well. In fact, the revolution happened and countries were coming under thrall of communism. But he could foresee these changes required. That's why I give importance to his thoughts, that how he, that's why I said, how did he foresee that within very few years, I would say, he could see something going wrong. So that is what I asked you. That
yes, he could foresee it for a very simple reason, that the old order was not working. As simple as that. The old model was not working.
It was supposedly doing well. I mean, at that time, Russia was doing well. And by the time communists started following these hegemony theories and cultural studies, China had come up, and there were people who were going gaga over it. East Europe slowly came under its thrall, and we saw that, you know, there was domination of this thought on huge number of countries. But new left kept growing, while even on the top, as the normal communist movement was still very strong, which finally failed. But new left grew. So that is where I'm coming from.
Yes, exactly. And that precisely, I'll go back to Gramsci, because Gramsci turned Marx's model upside down in one sense, because the base and superstructure theory is very integral to the overall, rationalization of Marx and the ideation that we come across as Marxism. So the base and superstructure theory is very, very integral to that. And what he meant by base is economy, and superstructure is everything else. So even culture is, practically speaking, Marxism is a highly materialistic philosophy. So he did not regard culture as something tangible, which was the reason, by the way, why faith is an intangible thing for Marx. And he would not believe into something which is not tangible. He would not believe into something. He would not grant an authenticity to something which is not tangible and which is not feasible also. So that is why economy was the tangible thing. And since economy was the tangible thing, and since economics is the base of everything, the revolution has to happen at the level of the base. And industrialization was the manifestation of these economic fervor and economic theories and so on. And that is why within the sphere of the economy, within the sphere of industrialization, workers are the deprived classes, they are the oppressed classes. And that is why, by counting on the exploitation of the workers, by counting on their expectations, aspirations, which are perpetually unfulfilled, and this is how revolution could be made into a reality. So that is the Marxist way of doing things. But what Gramsci realized that, and that is the path-breaking observation by Gramsci, that it isn't economy, but it is culture which describes us more accurately and appropriately as human beings. And that is why from economy to culture, that was the transformation, which is the foremost reason for why this neo-left eventually came to be known as cultural Marxism. So those, and I'm sure Abbas will agree with this, that those who are perfectly familiar with the overall ethos of Marxism, they will even feel that cultural Marxism sounds a bit like an oxymoron.
Yeah.
Because if it is cultural, what does it have to do with Marxism? Because Marx is entirely focused on the materialistic aspects of life and so on. So that was the major reason.
But Prasanna ji, even as you talk about this cultural aspect of Marxism, but they actually they are not looking culture as the way we look at it. For them, culture is something that is to be abhorred, something to be deconstructed in every possible way. And what is this interest in deconstructing every aspect of human life, of every aspect of social life, and somehow trying to break down that those particular ideas?
I'll go back to your first question about this whole disparity between how we understand culture here. It's not our word and it's not our language. So Sanskriti and culture, so they being used interchangeably in the Indian context, in our day-to-day communication and in all our academic communications also. That's more or less a matter of convenience for us. Just like dharma is translated as religion here, and soul is translated as atma here. So it's just a matter of convenience, and again, all translations are invariably mistranslations, by the way. So having said that, your first question was about what do they exactly mean by culture when they say, or when Gramsci propounded it this way, and which eventually led to the foundation of the Birmingham Center for Cultural Studies in 1956 by Stuart Hall, Raymond Williams, and Richard Hogarth. In his very famous essay, it's a dissertation by Stuart Hall, he has explicitly spelled out what he means or what they mean by culture. And I'm quoting Stuart Hall, one of the founders of cultural studies, as a very offbeat discipline, or rather an anti-discipline in the academics. So Stuart Hall says, our aim is not to study culture. Our aim is to make one. And that precisely is their way of doing culture. So cultural studies doesn't really adopt the approach of anthropology. It doesn't really adopt the approach of archaeology. It doesn't really adopt the approach of any apolitical academic activity. It is necessarily a politically inclined and colored discipline, and they have explicitly acknowledged that. So they're not hiding their intentions. So that is one about the word culture in cultural Marxism, or the neo-left. What was new about it? So the new thing was the shift from economic model of society to the cultural model of society. The shift from The shift
Again, I
from the
come to the
proletariat.
question, instead of using culture as something to build upon, the entire studies are bent upon destroying whatever culture a society has. Then what do they construct out of it? That is the whole idea, that the whole riddle I keep on, coming to.
I think Abbas ji commented on deconstruction when he talked about the deep relationship between architecture and deconstruction, and he has commented on it very, very succinctly that postmodernism came into fashion first of all as something having to do very closely with architecture and constructions. Well, about deconstruction, we need to understand this, that deconstruction is not in the prima facie is not a destruction of culture by force or by violence or something. However, that doesn't mean that deconstruction of some indigenous values of Indian civilizations, it would not aim to destroy the Sanatani values or the indigenous values. It's not the case that they don't aim to. The question is how they want to do that. So their focus is more on.
Now come to India now. So I'll bring in Aabhas here. So then you can take the ball from him. Abbas, we followed this entire new left mode very, very fast. And by 1969, we had JNU, Department of Cultural Studies, on which in fact Prasanna ji specializes. So did the JNU model of cultural studies was only a copy of the European model, or was it also much, in a sense, I would say, much more insidious, where the effort was to somehow deconstruct the Indian cultural values, or what we call Sanskriti, and destroy very basic structure of much of it, what we like the family, the society, and many other things. So what would you call any departure from the standard European model in JNU, if there was any?
Yeah, so this becomes a very interesting case because I do see that, because of course communism and Marxism as a phenomenon is very recent and new. Of course, it has lived a certain age, but if one wants to go to the root, it goes to the, people say that the first communists were the Mazdaks way back in 5th century and something like that. So it's weird. The idea, what Marx wanted to speak about. Then Lenin speaks about the Peasants' War of Germany, where he links the thing with the Christianity, and a lot of things happen. So the perspective of Marxism and communism globally had also been changing with the time, because they always saw this as that because we spoke about the hegemony concept, what Gramci had. So this was becoming a very foundation, that the way the society is led by the hegemony of the topmost people. So they are setting the culture, tradition, and that is when the atrocity literature comes into play. And that exactly happened in India. People do have an opinion that Bhagat Singh was a Marxist at the age of 22, 23. So that was a time when people were watching Marxism as a phenomenon, or rather communism as a phenomenon, which was giving them revolution. And revolution mean for the Indians that time mean to gain the freedom, nothing else. So people, till very late, people didn't even knew what nightmarish person Hitler was. It was also known quite late. So Marxism was evolving in India as a very noble cause initially, and the people definitely had a lot of affinity with the idea of socialism, because Indians by virtue are socialist, and our socialism is something much more different. I do always define that. I do like to bring it in a very simple anecdotes. Like Marxist socialism is about, say, for example, I will give example of two students, X and Y. X is someone who never studied very hard, and he was completely drug addict and whatnot. Y worked very hard. Y got 90 marks. X got 40 marks. So Marxist socialism will say that both guys, they will take 40 plus 90, 130, both should get 65, 65. But Hindu idea of socialism will say that I will make that X guy also get 90, and both should get 90. So that's precisely our idea. But yes, we had this flair for socialism. It kept on going. initial literature of the Marxists are something very awesome because even I do a lot of study on the Mughal history. To talk about the Mughals, their economic policies, no one has done better job than Irfan Habib. And it's fabulous. And he has been very honest to put the facts. And as you spoke about the JNU phenomenon, that is when the things started changing. Till the late 1960s, things, even Marxist literature was not bad. They were all about stating the facts. And if one follows the facts, they will know that, in fact, the USSR is the land which has persecuted the religions the maximum. China has persecuted the religions, Abrahamic religions, the maximum. So that is where they come from. And it reflected very well in their literature. They critiqued all the Abrahamic faiths very strongly. But in 1970, when Nurul Hasan took over as a charity minister and JNU was in picture and not many things, one very essential project was happening, which got toppled. That project was the translation of R.C. Mazumdar's series of civilizational series book of 11 books. And Bharati Bhavan was supposed to publish it, if I'm not wrong, and into multiple languages. And this man just scrapped that project. And now the literature caught redefinition. What was the redefinition? Now, Marxism worked on a constant, and that constant is class. If you don't have a class struggle, this equation of Marxism fails. And in India, they introduced the idea because caste appeared like one of the very strongest way to create this idea of the class struggle. So this caste literature was very deeply rooted into the works by that time. Then the idea of employees against the employee was brought in, student against the teacher. So these ideas started erupting, brewing up in 1970s very strongly. And JNU had all the foundation actually goes to the founders of JNU at that time, that how the things were happening and who the people who took the chair that time. And that's where the JNU starts this case. While Indian case with the communism is something very different, right? From revolution to first the betrayal of the 1962 during the Indo-Sino War. And then, in fact, the split. There was split in CPI party based on the ground that who was going to lean with the hard. We also have a term called hard left and soft left. Soft left was more toward USSR. Hard left was toward China. So we have seen the phases, but JNU saw only one phase. It started with the atrocity literature, and that happens to be the foundation of the JNU type of communism. So while Mao's cultural communism was quite different, I see that our JNU guys or the JNU literature speakers or the people who propagate that idea, they have very different set of communism. And the way they align with the other faiths, like the Abrahamic faith, the way they institutionalize their idea is something very peculiar. Like if Lenin would have been alive, that might be that he would have committed suicide the way the JNU guys are working. And even Mao wouldn't have been very happy the way the JNU guys are operating. So what happens is that this is a very interesting case that Marxism communism speaks about totalitarian idea. All the faiths of the West or the Middle East are about the total solution. Like everyone has got total solution for life, how you need to wake up, what you need to eat. They've got so there's a lot of similarity between these ideas. So they try to merging together. They try to create some kind of.
But I would say that all the three being so totalitarian, so exclusivist, only one of them will survive. They can't survive together. They have to overpower each other someday.
Yeah. So this becomes very interesting because if we look what exactly is happening in China is not what is happening. And this is the current time. China's way to look at how they will deal with the things is something very different. But they are more communist than any Indian per se, at least in terms of how the identity comes across. In India, the case is that everyone is trying to outdo the common enemy, or rather the foe, which is the strong. Because see, when it comes to the dharmic values, it has got solution for everything in a very different, much different way than all these. Like, for example, there have been cases in Russia where the scientists were being killed simultaneously because their ideas were going against the dielectric materialism, because modern physics was not being accepted. And in fact, Lenin had written a whole short manual that how the science needs to be operated. So it reminds me of the Charlie Hebdo case. What happened with Charlie Hebdo? The similar kind of model. In India, both of them are trying to outsmart each other. And when it will come to really the final days or something, it's a truth that communists will always try to see all the Islamists, all the Abrahamics out, because their Marx is the ultimate prophet and that needs to survive. Of course, they will not follow his ideas, but that is what will sustain in their perspective. And as far as the Abrahamic faiths are concerned, they will definitely not be able to survive with the communist ideas, because that will go against their ideas. Only faith which can survive with communism to some extent is actually Christianity, because the readings of the Marx will also tell you that he had got certain leaning for Christianity. And in fact, Engels had said that perhaps Christianity can give a path for the communism. He had written it very strongly. So, so these are the three cases which might happen. And I do see that
considering the limitation of time is so involved, so engrossing a discussion. Each of you could do 1 hour at least with me and maybe a series of lectures. So going back to the academic side, because Aabhas got into more of a political side through academic analysis. Going back to purely academic side of, as I said, departure of the cultural studies in JNU, which are most concerned about somehow negating the Indian traditions as compared to what is happening in Europe. How it evolved into a kind of study which somehow ultimately became tukde type of thinking. And you being a part of the cultural studies ethos, and you have grown through that, what made you turn to this study, and how do you think that if cultural studies is such a wonderful topic, how it can be corrected in a way that the course correction can be done where it becomes much more inclusive and much more educated to the people? And I don't think why it should be part of literature and why not political science.
Yes. Well, you described me as somebody who is a part of this cultural studies game. And I thank you for that. So the first thing that I would like to put across very, very politely is that the discipline was not started with a view to launch any cultural onslaught against India. Its growth, its development, its spread, and its dissemination across universities all over the world is a part of a global phenomenon. We accepted globalization, 1990s. 80s was a busy period of globalization. There are still some regions, some remote regions in India where drinking water facilities have not yet been facilitated. But Coca-Cola is easily available in those villages for the tourists who go there. We live out globalization in our material life as consumerism, as capitalism, as industry. What is happening at present in the intellectual, cultural, epistemological domain, to me personally, as a student of cultural studies, how I understand it as the cultural after effects of the market-driven globalization. These are the cultural after effects of the market-driven globalizations, and that is what is happening. So it has to be understood. It has to be analyzed in terms of our general understanding of the global scene, the global ideological scene. The cultural anomaly that is there in the entire corpus that cultural studies puts across through the academics of humanities and social sciences and whatnot. The anomaly is the typical instrument of the anti-majoritarian politics which they practiced in Europe, which they replicated in the US through the parlors of Columbia. And Columbia is a very interesting case. They have a Vedanta cell, they have a Vedanta department, and plus they have this outright critical thinking tradition, which started up way back in 1930s. After this Frankfurt School guys, they were expelled from Germany. They stayed at Geneva for 2 years and then they landed at the United States of America. So Columbia, they established themselves in 1930s. So 1935 till 1951, Herbert Marcuse, Horkheimer, and Theodor Adorno, they introduced the critical thinking tradition, which eventually led to the foundation of cultural studies. And 1990s, with the wake of globalization at the industrial horizon here in the South Asian countries, we got subjected to that whole global process. And what is happening in the academics today is that they are replicating the same models on which they worked in Europe and in the US, and they're replicating the same models through university education in India. What is the most undesirable aspect of this entire process? To me, as a student of all this, how I understand things is, to define the so-called majority along the lines of how they understand majority in Europe or elsewhere in the world, to define the Indian general population along the similar lines, that is the cultural anomaly. That is the displacement. And that is the most devastating blunder which happens at the basic level, because the entire edifice of cultural Marxism, the entire edifice is founded on this basic principle of anti-majoritarian politics. So why LGBTQ? Because heterosexuality is a majoritarian norm. Why LGBTQ? Because heteronormativity is a majoritarian norm, and heteronormativity and heterosexuality leads to that cultural hegemony with regards to sexuality. So let us focus on those who are not necessarily included into this category and who are different from the majority. And whatever politics you want to launch, whatever cultural politics you want to launch it with the support of those whom you perceive politically as minority, and that is why ever exploited. So that is the anomaly that I personally find that is affecting our academics of humanities. Well, this is not to say that a society which is not sensitive to the issues of the kind of individuals and communities with whatever concerns they live, with whatever reality they live in terms of their orientation. Since I refer to the LGBTQ community, this is not to say that their concerns are illegitimate. The question is, would the insurgent politics be a sure way of helping them to remove whatever oddities they live their lives with? Or would there be a more matured approach of cooperation instead of confrontation?
Professor, and the anomaly is that these Marxists who support LGBT, for example, tie up with the extreme right church and extreme right Islamists who can't stand LGBT, while Hindu Dharma has accepted LGBT concerns. So what has been corrected by the Indian politics of a typically orthodox conservative political party was not supported by the so-called progressive or rebels who talked about it. So there is another anomaly also. The difference between what they think and difference they behave on the ground is very different.
That's true.
So I will come to the final point. I will come to the final stretch as I asked you, how this cultural studies milieu can be improved or corrected, where we can have much more inclusive way of doing the same analysis and going ahead with the same thinking. So we can correct the kind of, we are not saying that cultural studies, every devolution should be, kicked out. I am not saying that, neither are you saying that, nor would Aabhas say that. But then how do we correct this particular problem with our academics?
Okay, well, that's an interesting question. And any discussion on these issues, it would be incomplete if we do not touch upon this, this last very, very important aspect of, okay, fine, then what? So what's the solution? So what's the alternative to that? I personally feel as an Indian that Abbas made a passing comment on this when he talked about Hindutva and this inherently liberal attitude of Hindus all over the world. I wouldn't say essentially, because again, essentially, when you say essentially, then it becomes problematic. That you are claiming it only as your attribute by excluding others. So we are inherently liberal as Hindus, thanks to the immense diversity that we have. And our diversity of our values, the diversity of our values concerning faith systems, our values concerning everything, life at large, it resonates with the diversity of Prakriti, nature. So there is nothing new. I mean, we don't feel that we adopting diversity and liberal outlook to life and liberal outlook of the world, we are doing anything, we don't have to deliberate for that. It's our genetic friend. Having said that, I'll only say this, that culture is something, Sanskriti is something, values are something, since times immemorial, we have been leaving them out. Instead of theorizing them, documenting them, writing theses about them, dissertations about them, and so on. So that is very much a part and parcel of our everyday life. However, we forgot one thing. We forgot one very important thing. That the modern contemporary academics, which gives a lot of importance to documentation and theorizing of everything, unfortunately, we have always focused on the living aspect of it. We lived it out. We live it out, we internalize it. It becomes a part and parcel of our everyday life. We practice it, but we do not theorize it in the academically palatable manner. So one sentence answer to your question would be, we need not actually work on the practice part. See, whatever issues are there, whatever negativity and undesirable part is there in the practice, time takes care of it, and they get removed, and they must get removed. If there is something like caste discrimination, lock, stock, and barrel, we know what to do with that. We are aiming towards a casteless society. However, practice, we very much have. One very competent alternative to this anti-majoritarian left-centric cultural studies would be to come up with some very sound theoretical work of the practice of life of people of India. So if we could develop that attitude of theorizing it in an academically palatable manner, this whole fluidity between, what a beautiful thing it is, this whole fluidity between what we understand as classical music and what we understand as folk music. We don't really have a dichotomy between that. There is a continuity between classical music and folk music here. Even these categories are not originally our categories, right? So we just need to focus more on the shared ground, commonality, the diversity, and these are the primordial values with which life in India has been lived by the people of India at large. We just need to develop that attitude of developing it into an academically palatable theory. That's the end of it.
To put it in short, these should be part of the cultural studies too. That's what I would, summarize.
Yes, just one sentence, Ratanji. Cultural studies evolved and it got disseminated all over the world, and it originated at Britain. But Australia has its own version of cultural studies. The United States has its own version of cultural studies. They take a pride in practicing it as American cultural studies and Australian cultural studies. Africa has its own version of cultural studies. When it comes to India, it really is a disheartening thing to see as to why is our academic community is not really very keen on exploring the possibility in the academically palatable manner of coming up with the Indian cultural studies. Thank you.
Great. So, Aabhas, we have got 2 minutes, so you would like to make closing comment on what Prasanna ji said, that you want to add to that?
Yeah, it's very pertinent that we really go. I always see that my perspective has always been that it's like a market, and the kind of the people who will come out to study the thing, that is how the academic will also start flowing. It will not be other way around. And we have really failed to embed the ideas from the childhood. Like, for example, if a student is introduced about calculus at standard 11 or whatever level, he needs to be told, irrespective of whether it's in the book or not. It was Madhavacharya of Kerala who had first spoken about the calculus, and basics of differentials were led by Aryabhatta long back. So what will happen that even if it's not in the book, the person has got the connect with the culture and the tradition. And I don't like, there's a whole lot of idea that JNU need to be dismantled and whatnot, and all kind of, I see them as a very rubbish ideas. We need to come up with an idea that the students who are going to go there are going to be the receptor of not the falsified version. So automatically the whole, say, for example, if a curriculum has got 30 people to be registered for PhD in certain subject, can there be 20 students who can do the thesis on something related to Indian tradition or Indian culture? If there will be majority of it, of course, the teacher, if Irfan Habib is written extensively about the short cities of the past, why can't it be done now? So we first need to get away with our biases and be very focused in more of activity than activism. As I always say, that we are more of
the problem comes from, subterfuge of putting cultural studies as a part of English literature and not part of social sciences. That I think there itself the problem starts. Yeah. I think both of you would agree on that. So on that note, though it's such a compelling and engrossing discussion, the limitation of time which we impose on ourselves makes me close this talk. But surely we'll come back again and get more into these details. So today I was just outlining the whole thing, because we talk of those terminologies, but we don't know, most of us don't know who are listening to us. So that was the whole idea, and we'll take it up further as we get more responses. And we need to understand more how the left works, so we know as what is called a Purva Paksha and what is their thinking. That is the reason I took this topic. Thank you, both of you. It was a wonderful session. I'll be closing the talk